Welcome to Beyond the Clinic, the podcast for health professionals ready to transform their expertise into innovative income streams that extend beyond the traditional clinic model. I'm Sarah Armand-Buttle. I'm a registered dietitian and certified business coach and proud owner of 2 successful online businesses. I understand the leap from the security of a regular salary can feel intimidating because I've been there too. But it doesn't have to be scary, and you do not have to do this alone. Here you'll learn tangible strategies to accelerate your business growth. So if you're dreaming of using your expertise to create impact and a life of freedom, then you're in the right place. Today, I wanted to talk openly and honestly about my experience leaving the NHS after over 20 years as a dietitian. Whether you've already left the NHS and you're navigating your next steps in your business, or you're still in it right now, wondering if you'll ever feel brave enough to step away, then this episode is for you. Or maybe you're just a bit nosy and you're here for the tea of what actually happened behind the scenes. The first thing I want to make clear is this isn't an episode about NHS bashing or criticising the system or the people in it or the profession that I was proud to be part of. Not at all. It shaped me as a clinician. It gave me experience I will always value, and it gave me the credibility and a ton of friendships too. This is about being honest about the moment that I realized it no longer fit the life that I wanted. It's about telling the truth of my experience, not to persuade you to do the same, but to help you make sense of what you might be feeling and to normalize the thoughts that you might be too scared to say out loud. I'll be diving deep into the behind the scenes of what I was really feeling whilst in the NHS, a lot of which I'm sure you'll be able to relate to, as well as the moment I decided it was time to go all in on my private practice. You'll get an insight into the things I prioritized in the very early stages of building my business and the things I invested my time into learning. So grab a cuppa and let's start at the beginning. When I first qualified as a registered dietitian, I was ecstatic. Genuinely ecstatic. I remember thinking, I've made it. After all of those years of studying, the placements, the exams, the repeated first year, and suddenly I was an NHS dietitian. I was so proud to be part of something bigger than me and proud to introduce myself and say what I did. Then as the years went on, I progressed and climbed the ladder. I was in leadership roles for 7 years. I managed teams. I became dietetic manager, then divisional director, then AHP lead. And each time I moved up the ladder, there was that same feeling again. I've made it. I've worked so hard to get into these roles. And by the time I became an 8B consultant dietitian at just 41, I'd essentially reached the top of my ladder in my field. Now, on paper, it looked like a very successful career. And in many ways, it was. That's why what came next was so confusing, because when you've achieved the titles that you worked so hard for and you've climbed the ladder, you've gone into management, you've gone back into clinical, you expect to feel settled and content, right? But instead, I found myself thinking, is this it? And these feelings had nothing to do with enjoying my work. I absolutely loved being a dietitian. I worked in pediatric diabetes. I cared deeply about my patients. I got to hang out with them in school. I got to do home visits. We did cookery classes. It was just brilliant. I got such a buzz out of helping make a difference to these young people's lives. And you know what? I still do. So what was it about? Well, there wasn't one pinnacle moment where I thought, I can't do this anymore. There wasn't a big incident that forced my hand. It was a combination of lots of different things that ultimately led to me leaving the NHS. So the first thing was realizing that there was literally nowhere left to go. I'd reached the top of the ladder. I'd done it for the last 7 years, switching from role to role to role. And on paper, I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do. And yet, there was this quiet feeling that I wanted more challenge, more variety, and yes, more income. And I'm very open about this because wanting more isn't greedy, and wanting more doesn't compromise your ethics in any way, shape, or form. I had the experience, the expertise, the results. There was no reason not to crave more. And of course, it wasn't all about the money. I genuinely loved the work itself and being part of a meaningful change. That had always been the heart of why I became a dietitian. But at the same time, the money did matter. It's important to say that out loud. Wanting to be fairly compensated for your skill, your time, and your expertise is 100% fair. So, to all of you listening, let that be a reminder to start recognizing the value of what you bring to the table and start normalizing saying, I want more. In saying this, in the early stages of feeling like I wanted more, I felt so much guilt for it because this was a good job with a really good pension. And I was like one of only 5 pediatric dietitians at this level in the country. So at first, I found myself asking, who was I to want more? Who was I to feel restless and, dare I say, bored with my role? I worried a lot about what other people might think if I was to leave. My friends, my family, my NHS colleagues. I worried people would think I was ungrateful or irresponsible. And the internal conflict sat with me for a long time. I'll never forget all those years ago when me and my husband would go on long walks when we were at my parents' house in Spain. My mum and dad would be keeping an eye on the kids, and me and my husband would be on these long walks with their dogs, talking about how I was feeling about work and the potential possibilities that were out there. I wish I could go back to that time and tell myself that wanting more didn't make me ungrateful or selfish. I so wish I could go back and tell myself that, Sarah, you bloomin' well did it. The other big factor that led me to starting my own business was down to what I call the red tape effect, something that quietly limits skilled clinicians. No matter how good you are at your job, how committed you are to your patients, or how much you care, the NHS comes with its own invisible barriers that limits how much impact you can have within the system. Certain policies are designed with good intentions, but they can create a ceiling on how much you can actually do and how freely you can use your expertise. Maybe you've had a similar experience to me here. I'm a big believer that red tape massively limits good clinicians. And for me, it was just another factor that led me to where I am. You know, simple things like wanting to create a certain type of leaflet for my patients and having to run it through a paper group committee, which would take 6 months to be approved. Being told I had to reduce the number of school visits I did. And yet these kids didn't come to clinic. It was the only way that I could get to them and educate them on managing their diabetes. Those limitations, they really did impact my creativity and how well I could be a clinician. But despite all of this, and despite very clearly wanting something more, I stayed where I was for years, actually, feeling this way, until a moment came when my life completely changed. So in 2018, my lovely mum passed away, and losing my mum forced me to reevaluate everything, not just work, but everything in life. Grief has a way of doing that, doesn't it? It brings perspective, whether you're ready for it or not. And life suddenly just felt too short to stay stuck in something that no longer fulfilled me. And it wasn't about disliking my job. It was about recognizing that the way I was working and the life that I was building around it no longer felt aligned. So up until that point, I'd been managing quietly and telling myself I could keep going and maybe that this is just a phase. And I'd tell myself that I'd think about changing things later. But after my mum died, I realized that I needed to stop waiting for later to come. So the decision I made at that point wasn't to leave the NHS. It was to stop treating my private practice as something on the side and to go all in on it. Because during this time, I was running my private practice as a bit of a side hustle. And that's when I decided it was really time to give it a proper go and see whether it could become a business that might eventually replace my NHS salary. So after that point in 2018, things didn't change overnight. I didn't hand in my notice there and then. What changed was how seriously I took the idea of building something alongside my NHS role. So I already had this really well-established private practice. It had existed quietly in the background for years, decades. I had referrals from colleagues, from doctors, people finding me through directories like Bupa. But up until then, it had always just been there, but not by any means a priority or something I was taking seriously. But after losing my mum, I decided to stop treating it like a hobby and started really thinking about whether this could turn into something sustainable. I made sure to approach this carefully. though. I didn't want more private patients just for the sake of it. I was already busy enough. I had 2 young children. But what interested me was leverage. Now, by leverage, I mean doing work once and helping more people without trading more of my hours for money. So during my grief, I actually spent 3 months living at my parents' house in Spain, supporting my dad, sorting through my mum's things. And during this time, I started listening to business podcasts when I went out walking, like Amy Porterfield's Online Marketing Made Easy show and Pat Flynn, who had Smart Passive Income. And I was dedicating a lot of my time to learning and trying to understand how people were building businesses outside of traditional 9-to-5 roles. And that's when I first came across the idea of different ways to generate online income, like the courses, like digital products. So resources that I could create once and sell again, and again. And at first, it felt almost a bit too good to be true, almost a little bit dodgy in a way, but I was really curious. So I experimented. I created a couple of children's portion-sized guides and I sold them directly from my website. They were low cost. They were $9.99 each. There was just 5 pages in a PDF. But when those first sales came in, something clicked. Not because it was life-changing money, but because it was proof. It was proof that my expertise had value outside of a clinic room. Proof that I could help people without needing to be present every single time. Proof that this could actually really work. So then I spent a lot of time learning more, testing different things, failing here and there, and tweaking and changing things as I went. And all of this happened alongside my NHS role. It wasn't about abandoning my work. It was about delivering my work in new and different ways. And it didn't take me long to realize that this work was actually giving me a real sense of joy in a way that I hadn't had for a long time. So from here, I knew I needed a plan of action. So I set myself a goal. I wanted to double my NHS salary. My thought process at the time was if I hit that goal, I would know that my business was sustainable and I could do this. But I didn't want to see tons of patients. I wanted flexibility in my life and in my work. So I focused on building things that I could scale, like the courses, like digital products. And I also looked into other income streams like earning through ad revenue on my blog, as well as affiliate income from recommending other people's goods and services. And I learned how to do these things properly and ethically as a dietitian, and I tested things really slowly alongside my NHS role. Then in 2020, I reached my goal. I doubled my NHS salary in less than 2 years. I made £124,000 in a year, which was double my 8B. And I did this all without seeing any more patients. And that was the moment. That was when I realized that, my goodness, I could totally do this. And then the pandemic hit, of course, and almost overnight, everything changed. Something unexpected happened quite quickly during this time. My colleagues started coming to me. They'd seen that I was making money online for the sort of 18 months before without seeing any patients face to face. And they were curious. Many of them were really worried because suddenly the NHS didn't feel quite as stable as it once had. It wasn't a really nice place to work at that point in time. And so they wanted to know how starting a private practice worked and whether it could be possible for them as well. And then I had other colleagues who already had well-established private practices, but in real life, and they needed to pivot and move things online. So at first, I just helped informally. I answered questions. I shared a bit about what I was doing and what I'd learned. I sent people to go and read things and listen to things. I didn't charge anybody any money for this. I was just giving them free advice. It didn't even occur to me to charge for this advice, if I'm honest. But as time went on, people weren't just asking if it was possible. They were asking how. And around the same time, I decided to deepen my own knowledge properly. And I decided to learn even more about online marketing and Meta, was Facebook at the time, Facebook ads, sales, of course, and course creation, but at a higher level, at master's level. And during this period, I was working with a business coach as well. And she pointed out that I was already helping and coaching people and that perhaps it was time to start charging for that support. I was a bit gobsmacked, to be honest, but that was the beginning of my second business, Dietitians in Business. That's when it was born. And so in January 2021, I took on my first 7 clients, all dietitians who wanted to build something more sustainable for themselves. And a month later, in February 2021, I handed in my notice to the NHS. So that's it. That was my full experience of leaving the NHS after over 20 years as a dietitian. Now, if there's anything I want you to take from this episode, it's this. You are allowed to love your profession and still want to evolve. You are allowed to be proud of your career and still outgrow it. You're allowed to say, I want more, without apologizing for it. And you don't have to blow your life up to make a change. You can build slowly and you can give yourself proof before you take that leap. So if you want to know more, but you don't quite know what that looks like yet, this is exactly why I now do the work that I do, because I've been there. I know what it feels like to love your clinical work, but to crave something more flexible. I know what it's like to want to earn more money without seeing more patients. And I know what it's like to worry about pensions and security and what your colleagues might say, because I've navigated all of that. And when you work with me inside my business coaching, it isn't about promising you unrealistic overnight success. It's about identifying what you could build based on your expertise, about creating offers that don't rely purely on one-to-one time, about learning how to leverage your knowledge ethically and sustainably, about understanding pricing and positioning yourself and building income streams that give you options. I work specifically with health professionals because I understand the context that you're operating in, as well as the regulations and our ethics. And you definitely do not need to be figuring this out on your own. So if you're ready to explore what business coaching could do for you, you can start by booking a free 20-minute discovery call with me. You can find the link to book our call in the show notes of this episode. Bye for now. That's it for another week. Thank you so much for joining me as we explore the abundance of strategies to help you recapture that feeling of possibility and excitement as you drive your business forwards and beyond the clinic room. If you found today's episode inspirational, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the show to stay in the loop for more valuable advice that I'm going to be sharing each week. If you want to be the first to hear about new episode releases, news and ways that I can support your business growth, then please don't forget to check out the links in the show notes, and you can also connect with me from there. Don't keep me a secret. I would be delighted if you left a review and shared this podcast with your colleagues. Until next time, bye for now.